Maddox Mercer had only been in Driftwood Bay for 12 minutes when a seagull crapped on his shoulder, a waitress dumped coffee on his Italian loafers, and a woman with a wild ponytail and fire in her voice yelled at him for stealing her parking spot. "Welcome to the coast." He wiped the bird mess off his shoulder with the linen napkin from his to-go bag and looked up just in time to see her barefoot, sun-kissed, and furious charging toward him like a hurricane in denim. "That was my spot," she snapped, brown eyes blazing as she planted herself in front of his sleek black Aston Martin. Maddox raised a brow, more amused than offended. "There are 6 other spots. But that one's mine. Everyone knows it. It's an unspoken rule," she said, folding her arms. "Clearly you're new." He glanced around at the sleepy coastal town, rows of pastel storefronts, a bakery with hand-painted signs, and a salty breeze thick with ocean air. It was a world away from Manhattan. And that was exactly why he'd come. "I am," he said plainly. "Maddox Mercer." She didn't flinch. Didn't even blink. "I don't care." He chuckled. "And you are." "Vanessa Hale," she said, spinning on her heel and walking away without another word. He watched her disappear into a blue and white surf shop and muttered under his breath, "Charming." 2 days later, he saw her again. Same wild ponytail. Same barefoot attitude. This time she was carrying a surfboard on her hip and laughing with a blonde kid who looked about 8. "Zeke, you're dragging it," she called, her voice light now warm. "Come on, you're strong, don't fake it." The boy puffed out his chest and yanked the board behind him with both hands. Maddox, leaning against the open door of the real estate office across the street, smiled despite himself. He had no plans to meet anyone here. His goal was simple: escape. After selling his tech company for over $100 million at 31, the attention had gotten suffocating. Paparazzi, calls, fake friends. He wanted quiet, waves, maybe a dog. And yet here he was, watching a woman he barely knew and her little brother or son, like they were the most interesting thing on the planet. Later that week, Maddox walked into the surf shop. Bells jingled overhead as he stepped inside. "Salt air and sand," the sign had read. The place smelled like coconut wax and sea breeze. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, maybe a towel, maybe a reason. Vanessa stood behind the counter in cut-off shorts and a faded tank top, tapping on an iPad. She glanced up, did a double take, and groaned. "You again?" He grinned. "I figured I owed you a peace offering." She narrowed her eyes. "Unless it's the parking spot, I'm not interested." He pulled a box from behind his back and slid it across the counter. She opened it slowly. Inside were 2 pastries from the local bakery. One was shaped like a dolphin. The other had "Sorry I'm rich and parked like a jerk" written in blue icing. She snorted. "That's the most ridiculous apology I've ever seen." But did it work? There was a pause. Then, a little. Maddox started stopping by the shop more often. Sometimes for surf gear, sometimes just to say hi. He learned that Vanessa had lived in Driftwood Bay her whole life. The surf shop had been her dad's before he passed, and now she ran it with her younger brother, Zeke, who she'd been raising since their mom took off 3 years ago. "So you're like full-time sister and guardian?" Maddox asked one afternoon while lounging on a wooden bench outside the shop. "Yeah," she said, sipping from a coconut water can. "It's a lot, but he's worth it. He's the best kid." He nodded. "Seems like it." "You don't have kids?" she asked, eyeing him. "Nope." "Girlfriend?" He shook his head. "Huh." She looked genuinely surprised. "You're too polished for this town. You look like a guy who drinks espresso and yells at interns." "I used to be," he admitted, watching her reaction. "But espresso gave me acid reflux and interns started calling me sir, so I retired." She blinked. "Retired?" "Sold my company last year. Moved here to breathe." She studied him for a long time. "You're a millionaire?" "I am." Her lips parted slightly. "You bought the old lighthouse property, didn't you?" "I did." "That place is worth more than any sane person should pay for a fixer-upper," he finished, smiling. After that, something shifted. They started spending time together. He helped Zeke with math homework one evening when Vanessa had to close the shop late. She invited Maddox to a local bonfire on the beach where he showed up in loafers and left barefoot. Their chemistry was undeniable. But it wasn't just attraction, it was the way she saw through his polished exterior and how he found peace in her chaos. One night, after a long walk on the beach, she turned to him and said, "You know you don't have to hang around here pretending to be normal." "I'm not pretending," he said. "I like it here. I like you." She froze. "You barely know me. I know you're strong. I know you fight for your brother and this town. I know you love hard." "That's enough for me to want more." Vanessa's expression softened. "I never expected someone like you to show up in Driftwood Bay. And I never expected someone like you to make me want to stay." They didn't kiss that night, but the air between them buzzed with something real, something dangerous and beautiful. He left her at her door with a quiet "Good night, V," and walked back to his car under a sky full of stars, heart already halfway gone. And for the first time in years, Maddox Mercer didn't feel like a man running from something. He felt like a man running toward someone. The morning fog rolled in thick over Driftwood Bay, soaking the world in silver as Maddox stood on the edge of the lighthouse cliff, hands buried in the pockets of his wool cardigan. The ocean below roared with life, waves smashing against rocks like they were trying to speak. He didn't usually wake up before sunrise, but ever since that walk with Vanessa, everything felt different, like his pulse had synced with the tide. Behind him, the gutted shell of the old lighthouse house stood silent. The roof still leaked, the porch leaned like it was tired, and the plumbing hissed like it resented being disturbed after years of disuse. But Maddox had grown attached to the place. It was stubborn and rough around the edges, like someone else he knew. He turned when he heard the crunch of tires on gravel. A pickup truck pulled up and out stepped a man in a faded fishing cap and overalls. Maddox recognized him as one of the locals Vanessa had introduced at the beach bonfire, Bo, the town's unofficial handyman and full-time grump. "You serious about fixing this place?" Bo called out, eyeing the crumbling structure. "I wouldn't have bought it just to let it rot," Maddox said, walking over. "Plenty of folks thought you were gonna tear it down and build one of those concrete monstrosities. You know, with glass walls and no soul." "I'm not interested in glass boxes," Maddox said. "I want to restore it. Keep it honest." Bo studied him for a moment. "Vanessa said you weren't just another rich fool passing through." "Guess I'll find out." With that, he grabbed a crowbar from the truck bed and headed toward the porch. That afternoon, Maddox stopped by the community center where Vanessa was helping Zeke with a sandcastle contest the town had organized for the local kids. He leaned on the wooden fence surrounding the grassy field, watching her kneel beside Zeke as they carefully shaped the turrets. "I thought castles were supposed to have moats," Maddox said when she stood to stretch. Vanessa glanced over, brushing sand from her thighs. "We're improvising." Zeke decided this one's magical. "Does that mean it floats?" "No. It flies." "Obviously." Maddox grinned. "Naturally." She handed him a bottle of water from her bag. "You look like you've been wrangling ghosts." "Just Bo," he said, twisting the cap. "We pulled out 3 rotted window frames and found an entire bird skeleton in the attic." Vanessa winced. "Charming. I'm learning a lot. For instance, insulation from the 70s smells like wet regret." She laughed, a full sound that lifted something inside him. "You really are serious about that place?" "I am." She hesitated, then said, "My dad used to take me out there when I was little. Said it was the best view in town. We'd sit on the ledge and watch the storm roll in." Maddox leaned closer. "You miss him?" "Every day," she said, not flinching. "He was loud and stubborn and used duct tape for everything, but he was the best person I've ever known." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he watched the way her eyes fixed on the horizon, like she was seeing something that wasn't there anymore. "I think he'd be proud of you," Maddox said finally. She looked at him, then really looked and said, "That's the first time someone said that in a long time." Later that week, Vanessa invited Maddox to a town fundraiser for the new library annex. He wasn't sure what to expect, but when he arrived at the local high school gym, he was met with string lights, folding chairs, and the smell of baked ziti. She met him at the door in a black jumpsuit with copper hoops in her ears, her hair down for the first time. He stared a beat too long. "You clean up well," she said, handing him a name tag that read Maddox M. "You could have warned me there'd be a dress code." I almost wore boots with paint on them. Would have matched half the crowd, she said, leading him inside. The night was a blur of introductions, awkward small talk, and the mayor's endless speech about community spirit. But Maddox couldn't take his eyes off Vanessa. She moved through the room like she belonged to it, laughing with the older women who'd known her since she was born, handing out raffle tickets, hugging everyone like they were family. When the silent auction started, Maddox wandered over to the table and saw a framed photo of the town pier taken at sunrise. The tag read, "Donated by V. Hale." He pointed at it. "You took this?" She nodded. "I shoot for fun. Helps clear my head." "It's beautiful." She shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with the compliment. "It's just a pier." "No," he said. "It's not." Before she could respond, the auctioneer shouted, "Bidding starts at 20. Maddox raised his hand. 200. Vanessa's eyes flew wide. "Maddox," someone else called. 250. He didn't blink. 500. A few gasps rippled through the crowd. The auctioneer pointed. "Sold. To the man with too much money and excellent taste." Afterward, outside under the flickering parking lot lights, Vanessa crossed her arms and leaned against his car. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to. It's just a photo." "I know. But it was yours." She looked away, cheeks flushed. He took a step closer. "You have a way of making ordinary things feel like something more." "I don't know what to say to that." "Then don't say anything." They stood there for a long moment, the air between them stretching tight. She opened her mouth, but the gym doors swung open and Zeke came running toward them, waving a cupcake. "Vanessa, they said I could take extras." She laughed and caught him mid-run. The spell between her and Maddox broken but not forgotten. As they loaded into the truck, Vanessa paused and said, "You should come by the shop Saturday. Zeke's helping me repaint the sign. It'll be chaos." "You'd fit right in." "I'll bring donuts," he said. She smiled but didn't answer. Saturday came with blistering sun and streaks of blue paint on every surface. Maddox showed up in jeans and a t-shirt, donuts in hand. Zeke was already covered in splatters and Vanessa had paint in her eyebrow. "You're late," she said, pointing to an untouched corner. "Donuts bought me a 10-minute grace period," he said, handing her the box. She took it and said, "You've got 5. By midday, they'd painted the sign twice, once accidentally in the wrong shade and spilled an entire can of primer. Maddox ended up barefoot, Zeke tried to paint the dog that wandered by, and Vanessa nearly fell off the ladder laughing. When they were done, they sat on the curb outside the shop, sweat-soaked and exhausted. "I haven't had this much fun in years," Maddox admitted. "Me neither," she said, glancing at him. He looked at her, really looked, and said, "I'm not going anywhere." She gave him a long, steady look. "I'm not the kind of woman you visit for a season." "I know. And I don't do halfway." "Neither do I." She hesitated. "Then what are we doing?" He leaned back on his hands, staring at the sky. "I think we're starting something." And though she didn't say it, her silence was full of agreement. The old lighthouse finally had power again. Maddox flipped the switch near the entryway and a low hum filled the space before warm light bathed the weathered wood and exposed beams. He exhaled slowly, staring up at the walls that had once held only silence. Now they echoed with the sound of possibility. He should have felt triumphant. Weeks of permits, rewiring, and negotiations with the town council had paid off. But instead, all he could think about was the way Vanessa had gone quiet after their last conversation. She hadn't pulled away exactly, but something behind her eyes had changed. Like she was bracing for something inevitable. He ran a hand through his hair and stepped outside, where the wind whipped across the cliffside. Below, the shoreline stretched endlessly, waves curling in with steady rhythm. He didn't want to wait anymore. That evening, he found her behind the surf shop, kneeling in the garden beside a row of tomato plants. Her hands were covered in soil, and her braid hung over one shoulder, swaying as she moved. "You're late," she said without turning around. "I brought you something," he replied, holding up a battered book with sand-stained corners. She stood and wiped her hands on her shorts. "What is it?" "Your photography portfolio." You left it at the community center after the fundraiser. Her brow furrowed. I didn't even realize it was missing. I figured, there's some incredible work in there. I haven't shown that to anyone in years. You should, he said. You have a gift. She looked down at her hands. Sometimes it feels pointless. Like I'm just capturing moments that disappear anyway. That's the point though, he said. You're preserving something no one else sees. She studied him for a long moment. Why do you care so much? Because you matter to me, he said. And the things that matter to you matter to me. Vanessa blinked, suddenly uncertain. I'm not used to that. I know, he said gently. She crossed her arms. You said you weren't going anywhere. But people say that all the time, Maddox. Then they leave. I'm not people, he said. I'm here. I've stayed. She turned away, her voice quieter. You don't know everything. He stepped closer. Then tell me. My mom called, she said finally. She wants to come back. Says she's clean now. Wants to see Zeke. Maddox's expression shifted. What did you say? I haven't said anything. I don't know what to do. She looked up. What if he gets his hopes up and she disappears again? Then you'll be there to catch him, he said. Like you always are. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. I don't want to be the one who makes that choice. You're not alone anymore, Vanessa. She looked at him then, really looked, and after a beat, nodded. Later that week, he invited her and Zeke to the lighthouse for dinner. He'd spent the day transforming the place. Candles flickered in mason jars along the railing, and an old record player spun soft jazz beneath the stars. He cooked himself, despite nearly setting off the fire alarm twice. When they arrived, Zeke's eyes lit up. This is like a pirate castle, he shouted, running toward the door. Vanessa laughed, a sound Maddox hadn't heard in days. You really went all out. I wanted it to feel different, he said. Special. Inside, the table was set with mismatched plates from town, and Maddox served grilled fish and roasted vegetables with practiced ease. Zeke devoured everything in sight, asked 100 questions about the lighthouse, and eventually passed out on the couch with a blanket around his shoulders. As the night deepened and the wind picked up, Maddox led Vanessa to the balcony. The moon hung low over the water, casting silver across her skin. I used to think I needed chaos to feel alive, he said. Pressure. Deadlines. $1 billion contracts. And now, she asked, her voice soft. Now I think I just needed peace. And people who make me want to be better. She looked out at the shoreline. You didn't have to come here. I think I did, he said. I just didn't know it yet. She turned to him slowly. I've never let anyone in like this. I'm not asking for all of you right away, he said. Just a chance. The wind moved her hair across her cheek. He reached up and tucked it gently behind her ear. She didn't pull away. Okay, she whispered. A chance. And then she kissed him. It wasn't tentative or shy, it was real, certain, and threaded with everything they hadn't said. His hands found her waist, hers tangled at his collar, and for a few breathless seconds, the world narrowed to just the two of them and the sound of the sea below. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. You really cooked all that yourself? She asked. I might have called the chef from the inn for pointers. She laughed and he kissed her again. The next morning, Maddox was carrying Zeke's backpack to the truck when he saw the envelope on the windshield. His name was scrawled across the front in familiar handwriting. He opened it slowly. Inside was a letter. Maddox, I'm sorry for disappearing this morning. I needed space to think. My mom is coming into town next week. I don't know what I'm going to do. Care about you. That hasn't changed. But I need to figure this out on my own. He stared at the page, heart tightening in his chest. She was pulling back. Not because she didn't feel the same, but because she was scared, and maybe because she didn't fully believe he would stay. He folded the letter and looked out toward the water. He hadn't come to Driftwood Bay for love, but leaving now wasn't an option. Not when his heart already belonged to her. Maddox stepped off the porch of the lighthouse just as the rain started, soft at first, then heavier, washing the cliffs in a gray veil. He didn't move. Let it soak through his shirt, drip down his spine, blur the horizon he'd stared at every morning since Vanessa left that note. It had been 4 days. Long ones. Quiet ones. He hadn't called. Hadn't shown up at the shop. He knew better than to chase someone who needed space. But he also knew he couldn't wait forever. Not when every corner of the lighthouse reminded him of her. The way she laughed when the wiring shorted. The curve of her smile when she'd said, "Okay," and kissed him like she meant it. He turned when he heard the sound of tires crunching gravel behind him. A small silver SUV pulled up, wipers working overtime. The door opened, and Zeke jumped out, raincoat unzipped, face anxious. "Vanessa's at the diner," he said, breathless. "She's been sitting there since this morning. She called me from the payphone near the pier and said she needed a minute, but she hasn't come back yet." Maddox grabbed his keys from his coat pocket, already moving. "Does she know you're here?" Zeke shook his head. "I told Mrs. Latham I was going to feed her cats and ran over." Maddox crouched so they were eye level. "You can't run off like that again. Not even if something feels wrong. You hear me?" Zeke swallowed hard, then nodded. "I'll go get her," Maddox said. "You stay with Beau. He's working on the porch railing. Tell him I said to keep you dry and out of the toolshed." Zeke hesitated. "She's been crying. Don't let her lie about it." Maddox stood slowly. "I won't." The diner sat at the edge of town, windows fogged from the heat inside. When he stepped through the door, a bell rang overhead. The usual locals were gathered in booths, sipping coffee and eating pie like the weather didn't matter. He spotted her immediately. Vanessa was in the last booth, hunched over a mug, hair damp and curling at the ends. Her jacket sat beside her, untouched. Her fingers were wrapped around the ceramic like they were the only thing anchoring her. He walked over and slid into the seat across from her. She didn't look up. "You didn't answer your phone," he said. "I left it in the glove compartment." Her voice was flat, quiet. Zeke thought something happened. "He's with someone?" she asked quickly, eyes jerking up. "Beau's got him. Dry and safe." She nodded and looked back down at the steam rising from her drink. "I didn't know where else to go," she said after a moment. "I didn't want to be near the shop. Or the house. Or the lighthouse." "Why?" he asked. "Because I felt like I was coming apart," she said, eyes fierce again. "And I didn't want anyone to see it." He leaned forward, his voice low. "You don't have to protect everyone all the time. I've been protecting Zeke since I was barely out of school," she said. "I don't know how to stop." "You don't have to stop. You just don't have to do it alone." She rubbed at her eyes. "My mom showed up this morning. She was at the pier waiting." Maddox went still. "She looked better," Vanessa said, voice cracking. "Clean, calm." "But she didn't ask about Zeke. She asked about money. Said she was trying to get an apartment 2 towns over and needed help with the deposit." "Did you give it to her?" "No," she said, her jaw tightening. "I told her to go. I told her she doesn't get to come back only when she wants something." Maddox reached across the table and took her hand. She didn't pull away. "I don't feel good about it," she said. "I should. But I don't." "Because you wanted her to be different," he said softly. "You wanted this time to be real." She looked at him, eyes brimming with something sharp. "I didn't want Zeke to hate me for shutting the door." "He won't," Maddox said. "Because you didn't slam it. You just locked it to keep him safe." She blinked hard. "I didn't expect you to come. I told you I wasn't going anywhere." She took a breath, shaky. "I don't know how to let someone else catch me when I fall." He squeezed her hand. "You don't have to fall. You can lean." They sat like that for a while, her hand in his, the rain tapping against the windows like it was trying to listen. When they left the diner, the rain had slowed to a mist. Maddox opened the passenger door and she slid in without a word. As he pulled onto the road, she said, "Can we not go home yet?" "Anywhere you want." She pointed to the beach road and he drove until the pavement ended and the sand began. They walked barefoot to the water's edge, the tide low, the sky clearing. She didn't speak for a long time. Finally, she said, "When my dad died, I thought the world would stop. But it didn't. It just got quieter. Like it was waiting for me to figure out what to do next." "What did you do?" "Opened the shop. Took care of Zeke. Learned how to fix a sink. And now," she looked at him, "now I think I'm ready to let someone in. Even if it's terrifying." He closed the space between them. "I'm not asking for perfect. I'm asking for real." She touched his face, thumb brushing his cheek. You already are. The kiss came easy this time. No hesitation. Just two people standing in the aftermath of everything that could have broken them, choosing not to run. A week later, Vanessa stood at the base of the new steps leading to the lighthouse. The railing gleamed with fresh varnish and a small brass plaque had been bolted to the post. It read, "In honor of second chances." Maddox came down the stairs carrying a tray with 2 glasses and a bottle of something expensive she couldn't pronounce. "What's this?" she asked. "Housewarming," he said. "For you." She raised an eyebrow. "I don't live here." "Not yet." She laughed softly. "Is that your way of asking me to move in?" "It's my way of saying you already did," he said. "You're in every room. Every inch." She stepped forward, took one of the glasses. "What if I snore? I'll build a guest room. What if Zeke hates the cliff wind? I'll plant trees to block it." She looked at him, eyes shining. "What if I fall even harder for you? Then I'll be exactly where I'm supposed to be," he said. They clinked glasses, and the wind picked up, carrying the scent of salt and pine through the open door. Inside, Zeke ran down the hallway, barefoot and laughing, chasing a paper airplane. Maddox caught him mid-run and tossed him over his shoulder while Vanessa laughed at the chaos. It wasn't perfect. It was messy, loud, uncertain. But it was theirs. And for the first time, Maddox didn't feel like a millionaire trying to escape something. He felt like a man who'd finally come home. The first morning they all woke up in the lighthouse together. The sun slipped through the worn linen curtains in long golden stripes. Zeke was curled up on the couch in his sleeping bag, a book open on his chest, breathing softly. Vanessa stood in the tiny kitchen, barefoot on the cool floor, watching Maddox fumble with the percolator like it was a bomb set to detonate. "You're putting the grounds in the wrong compartment," she said, stifling a laugh. "I'm improvising," he muttered, holding the lid down with one hand and squinting at the bubbling water. "You can build a smart home system from scratch, but coffee has defeated you. I'd like to see artificial intelligence survive a Driftwood Bay appliance from 1963. She walked over, gently nudged him aside, and took the pot. "Watch and learn, Mercer." He leaned against the counter, watching her with something soft in his eyes. "You always the smug in the morning?" "No. Only when I'm right before breakfast." They were getting used to the rhythm of sharing space. Maddox had ordered furniture from a local craftsman instead of flying in some sleek designer pieces from New York. Vanessa had brought stacks of her old photo prints and hung them in the hallway. Zeke had claimed the small upstairs bedroom with the rounded window that overlooked the sea, and Maddox had helped him build a telescope stand out of driftwood and rope scraps. But it wasn't just about moving in. It was about building something that didn't feel borrowed or temporary. One afternoon, Vanessa walked into the lighthouse to find Maddox sitting at the long work table he'd set up near the front window. Sheets of paper were spread out, covered in sketches and notes. She leaned over his shoulder and saw the words, "Community Center Expansion Proposal," scrawled across the top. "You're redesigning the town center?" she asked, surprised. "I've been listening," he said, tapping one of the pages. "They need more space, a real art room, a kitchen that doesn't flood every time it rains." She blinked, touched. "You're not just throwing money at it." "No. I want to make something that lasts." She sat beside him, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "You could have done anything with your money. Why this?" He looked at her, voice low. "Because for the first time, I'm building something that isn't about profit. It's about roots." She didn't speak for a moment. Then she said, "You know, most people would have just donated a plaque and disappeared." "I'm not most people," he said. That night, Maddox took her to a hidden cove he'd found while hiking with Zeke one morning. He'd set up a fire pit, 2 chairs, and a blanket that looked suspiciously like it had once belonged to the inn. She raised an eyebrow. "Did you steal that?" "I bartered." Gave them Zeke's telescope instructions. She laughed and sank into the chair beside him. The wind was light, the stars brighter than she'd ever seen them. He handed her a mug of cider and leaned back. "I've been thinking," he said after a while, "about what it means to stay." She turned to him. "You have doubts?" "No, but I've never had a reason to stay before." "Not really." Not until you. She looked into the fire, then back at him. I used to dream about leaving. When I was a teenager, I'd imagine running off to some city, starting over. But I never did. I stayed for Zeke, for the shop, for what was left of my family. You sacrificed a lot, he said. She shrugged. It didn't feel like a sacrifice. It felt like survival. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. Her breath caught. He didn't open it. Not yet. I had this made by the same guy who built the new railing. You know, the one who only speaks in grunts and occasionally sings to his cat. She smiled, but her eyes were locked on the box. Maddox shifted in his seat, suddenly uncharacteristically unsure. I know we haven't done things traditionally, and I know we're not perfect, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. He opened the box. Inside was a ring carved from driftwood, smoothed and polished, with a single tiny sapphire set in the center. It's not gold or platinum. Not yet. I'll get you whatever ring you want. But I wanted this one to be first, he said. Because it's from here. From now. Vanessa stared down at it. Lips parted. Marry me, he said. Because I don't want a life without you. I don't want a house without your voice in it. I don't want mornings without your coffee corrections or nights without your photos scattered across the floor. I want it all. With you. She didn't move. Just stared at him for a beat too long. Then she reached out, took the ring and slid it on her finger. It's perfect, she whispered. And yes. Yes, Maddox Mercer, I'll marry you. He leaned in and kissed her, the fire crackling beside them, the stars bearing witness. The next few weeks moved fast. But in this town, news moved faster. By the time Vanessa opened the surf shop for the season, half the town had already offered to help with the wedding. The mayor insisted on officiating. The women from the bakery baked a cake tall enough to require a ladder. Zeke designed the invitations using colored pencils and lined paper, and Maddox insisted they used them exactly as they were. They were married on the cliff beside the lighthouse on a day so clear it felt like the world had been scrubbed clean just for them. Vanessa wore a simple dress with a ribbon tied at the waist. Maddox wore linen and no shoes. Zeke stood beside them, holding a small conch shell he'd found that morning. When the mayor asked if anyone had objections, he blew into it like a trumpet. After the vows, after the laughter and the dancing and the cake so sweet it nearly knocked Beau into a sugar coma, Maddox wrapped his arms around Vanessa and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." She leaned in close, breath warm on his neck. "You gave me back everything I didn't know I'd lost." They spent their honeymoon in a tiny cabin on the far side of the bay, reachable only by boat. Maddox tried to fish and failed. Vanessa took pictures of every failure. They talked about the future, about expanding the shop, about building Zeke a studio when he got older, about maybe, possibly, adding one more to their little family. Months passed and the lighthouse became more than a home. It became a place where the town gathered, where kids learned to paint, where Vanessa hosted photography workshops, where Maddox taught Zeke how to wire a solar panel and where Zeke taught Maddox how to skip rocks without looking like he was throwing a tantrum. One night, just after the last of the guests left a small gallery opening they'd hosted, Maddox pulled Vanessa onto the balcony and wrapped his arms around her waist. "You remember the day we met?" he asked, brushing her temple with his lips. "You mean the day you stole my parking spot? That was the day I met the woman who changed everything." She turned in his arms, looking up at him. "You changed too. Only because you made it safe to." They stood together overlooking the sea, the lighthouse casting its soft glow across the water, illuminating everything they'd built. Not perfect, but real, and forever.